term that actually emerged in the 1990s, and it's been killed in research since then, but we actually got to know about it like really soon. The point is, what's alternative assessment? Again, it's a new way to break away from the traditional ways of assessments that we are used to. The pencil and paper or pen and paper assessments that we're used to. And these methods actually engage students in the learning and assessment process. Of course, students are all the time engaged in the learning process, whether they like it or not at some point, but they are not all the time engaged in the assessment process. And this is what we're attempting to do in the alternative assessments. They allow room for actual application of the knowledge. So students don't only get to know about items in the language or skills, but they get the chance to apply it. And of course, it integrates fun with learning, because students get to do tasks that are interesting to them, that appeal to them. Well, through assessment methods that are authentic, students get to get involved and feel more enjoyment. And these examples, of course, there are a lot of examples about alternative assessment. So we have some of them, but they are not limited to periodical classroom presentations, plays, talent shows, and the rehearsals. Okay, so students, as the lady over there said, get to prepare a topic of their interest and rehearse it throughout the semester and then present it at the end to the classroom or maybe to the school. Projects and research papers, comics and handicrafts. So they get to use the language items, okay, the grammatical items they learn, or the vocabulary lists, or maybe the skills, reading or listening or whatever, into comics and handicrafts. Journals, logs, and blog entries, and this is very personalizing for the students. They feel that they have their own say, they can express themselves, and they reach out for their teachers. Podcasts, which is a way to share information as digital audio files. So even students who are very much intimidated to speak in front of people, they can record whatever they wanted to say in the form of an audio file and upload it on a podcast. Audiobooks, if you're really after practicing intonation and pronunciation, they could actually read books or even recite poetry. Teacher design tests. And this somehow offers a comfort zone for the students, because teacher design tests are non-graded and they are informal. So students feel at ease doing them more than the high-stakes tests or the final tests at the end of the semester. Crossword puzzles, they actually can answer them or even better create them. Role plays and interviews, and this is very engaging for students, and they actually get to practice it together with each other, so it teaches them teamwork as well. Student self-evaluation and peer assessment, and portfolios and e-portfolios, which are our focus for today's workshop. And we're starting with peer evaluation with Nihan.
Alright, so peer evaluation or peer assessment is a term which actually suggests that students provide feedback for each other rather than you, the teacher, providing all the feedback. So the question is, why peer assessment? Well, first of all, it provides peer assistance. It also boosts their self-confidence. So if they get to know the correct answer, or they get to know if they're tackling accuracy, it's better for them to hear from their colleagues first before actually facing you as the teacher. So it's far less intimidating, they feel more comfortable with. It exposes students to other works and develops students' critical skills, which is very important because they are no longer dealing with their own ideas, but they are actually sharing ideas and getting to know more about others. So sharing ideas as well, and it helps them reflect on their own piece of work. They get to see other pieces of work, and then they see how far they were similar or different, and what other things they need to consider. Of course, it develops teamwork and work skills, which they're going to need afterwards, after they graduate. And it teaches students to develop and accept constructive criticism, which is very important because I'm sure that whenever you face your student with an opinion question, they go blank. So this is a very good training for them in order to speak up their minds and to have this critical eye on things. All right, but of course it can be challenging because it's not always easy. It's not always an easy thing to do. So you have some questions that you need to consider. How are you going to do it? And how are you going to pair up your students? How are you going to align a task with your curriculum? Because again, you are bound to cover certain topics and certain items for the end of the year exam. Okay, and how students are going to take turns giving feedback? How are you going to organize it? Is it going to be an oral feedback, students talking to each other, or are they going to write reports? And what are the tools they need? And what are the tools that you need to equip your students with in order to help them build this constructive criticism we're talking about? And will it be a hot or cold feedback? Are they going to have to take the piece of work and evaluate it at home and get back to their colleagues to provide them with their comments? Or is it going to be on the spot? This is another question that you need to take into consideration. And is it going to be graded or not? Is it graded or non-graded? And of course, the most important thing is what language item are you focusing on, or what are the skills that you need them to develop? And of course, when are you going to intervene as a teacher? When are you going to come into the light? All right, so that was for the peer assessment, and now we're moving to
Okay, I hope we're not confusing you by changing turns all the time. Well, while preparing this, we thought that a lot of points and a lot of theoretical ideas are not enough to bring in the picture into your imagination. We didn't want to talk from an ivory tower, so we chose a thing that we actually had in our classrooms, an experience that we actually experimented in our classrooms, which is students' portfolios. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about my experience, and this does not make it the best experience in the world, but it's just a suggestion to share with you. Okay, so before actually thinking about having a portfolio for each student, I had a lot of questions, like the questions Nihal talked about now. And I had to find the answers prior to deciding actually to have a portfolio inside my classroom. So here's how it went. I thought about my students. Okay, what's my class profile? How many students do I have? So I had 27 students. They were at advanced level. They were mixed abilities, unfortunately. So not all of them were advanced students. Some were at B1 level, and some were at B2, and some were at C1. And they were, of course, mixed gender. And then I asked myself a question. Why do I need them to have a portfolio? Why do they need to put all of this effort? What do I need to teach them? So my aim or two purposes were for my students to master writing a cover letter, argumentative and persuasive essays, which were what our curriculum stated at the time, and to work on their problems in sentence structure and layout of the writings. And I thought about the tasks. What are they going to do in this portfolio? How many tasks are they going to have? How many times are they obliged to write? So I thought we have 3 types of writings, and they're going to be assessed on these writings in their midterms, in their quizzes, and in their final exam. So why not have them draft each type at least twice before they sit for a real test and get graded on it? So in the first week, they get to write a draft, and I give them feedback on this draft, and then they write it again as a final version, and then they sit for the exam and write the same part, which by the time I assumed will have been perfected. Of course, the portfolio itself, or the collection compiled by the students, was non-graded because it was eventually preparing them for a graded test. What I had to do and what I had to think about, I thought was very important that I needed to familiarize my students with the rubric. And as we read before in the handout that you've just taken, the rubric is, or the scoring rubric is the criteria upon which they are going to be graded. So they needed to know that in order for them to know what are they after, what are they taking into consideration while writing. And I had to give them time. I had to give them a timeline with checkpoints, okay? When are they expected to submit their writings? What are the deadlines? When are they going to write the drafts and redraft and submit again? So I gave them the checkpoints every 2 weeks for the draft and the final version, and then the final feedback was just before the formative test, whether be it a quiz or be it a midterm or even the writing test. In my feedback sessions, I had to sit with every student individually and talk to them about their points of strength and the areas that they needed to work on, and listen to their oral reflection on their writings, because that was a very important part. They needed to evaluate and assess their own work before listening to my feedback. So they gave me oral feedback and reflections on their writings, and then I gave them my feedback, and even better, gave them recommendations, which type is the best for them to write in the final exam. So they went into the final exams, final writing exams, because we do this separately. They went into this writing test more confident than they were in the previous levels of English. So, to wrap up, things that I needed to familiarize my students with were the task, the rubric, and the role was simply to self-reflect and self-evaluate all the time. And to give you a glimpse of how it was, I know this is not very clear, but these are actual samples from my student, from a student actually. It's a single student, and I took his approval to use these, but I just omitted the name. This student started with the very first part at the very left of the slide. It was, as you see, a one-paragraph writing, very concise, undeveloped, and pretty much not the layout that we wanted in the writing. Then the second one was his second draft, which was a bit larger and a bit more developed. With the last paragraph, the last chunk was my feedback on his writing, so that was not his feedback. So yes, I used to write those big feedbacks in order for them to understand exactly what's going well and what's not going really well. The third and fourth parts were towards the end of the semester, where this student really got better in his writing, and his mistakes were minor slips of spelling, punctuation, but the structure was much, much better, and the layout, of course, was mastered throughout the semester and towards the end. Here again I have samples of the feedback I wrote. On the very left, I'm going to read this out just to give you an idea how it went. I'm saying here that you managed to build a good persuasive body for your essay. However, you need to sound more persuasive and provide variety of evidence to support your opinion. Also, you still need to work on your spelling a lot. You've shown good progress with the sentence structure, well done. And with the use of a variety of conjunctions, it will be great. And of course, as teachers, you all know that you have to give them the feedback in a form of a sandwich, positive, negative, positive, so that they don't get demotivated. And what's on the right of the slide is an example of reports I used to write separately for students. They received one before the midterm and one a little bit before the final writing test, where I just remind them with their scores they got so far. I highlight their areas of strength, highlight their areas that they needed to work on, gave them recommended exercises in the workbook because we didn't have enough time inside the classroom to do that, and then wrap it up with a comment on their performance so far. So this kind of report, it did not only give them highlights on what they're doing well and what they need to work on harder, but it actually personalized the learning process. They felt that the teacher is talking to each and every one of them individually. So they got really interested in showing their progress and getting better feedback and better reviews in the report. And this does not mean that you need to do all of this, but this is just an example that I was experimenting even before I read about portfolios. Alright, so we've been talking a lot here about our contexts and what we do and what we believe about authentic assessment or alternative assessment. I think it's your time, if you haven't done so far, because I'm sure some people of you, or maybe a lot, do that. Think about an alternative assessment method that you might use in your context. Something that you would integrate in your classroom, something that is new, or something that was mentioned in the presentation. How can you adapt it in your context? How are you going to make it easy and accessible for your students, and above all, how it's going to help you in the teaching and assessing process? So now again, my angels are giving you out the context sheet. All you need to do is just take 2 minutes, think on your own how you're going to fill the questions on the document out. Thank you.